Turn that on. Okay. The person in here before me always has this cranked up to like 95, which is a lot. Oh, let me put those up right away. I have not. You're right. I forgot to put those up. I was going to do it on Wednesday, but then the Wi-Fi decided it was, possessed by a demon. So I will do. That'll take me 2 seconds. If I can actually find this course, I have too many courses. Okay. No, don't do that. Okay, so I'm going to start in a second here. So sorry, I'm a little late. I was having a meeting with a student who's doing a special topics class with me, and honestly got way too into it. Super fun. I love the SOC 403s are just unbelievably fun to do. And yeah, we're talking about stuff for like an hour and a half, and I slightly lost track of time. And she had thoughts at the end, and I was like, oh, these are such good thoughts. And I wanted to hear them, but then I had to go. Okay, my Gen Alpha updates, and you'll see them if they upload in any reasonable amount of time. I know, this slideshow is now like 67 slides long. Okay, so that's done. They should be there. Yes, Gen Alpha update available now on Canvas. All right, so today we're finishing up talking about the best generation, the millennials, right? We are the best. Q&A open. Okay, where was I? Where we were was around. I will find it. Okay, yes, there we are. Okay, the end of marriage. Okay, here we go. I promise. I will not be this disorganized forever. Just sometimes. Okay, so we were talking about our millennials last time, right? I guess the last slide we really talked about was this one, right? Relationships. And again, this is largely a continuation of trends that we see with Gen X and then, I guess, and the baby boomers, is relationships change a lot, right? I think what you see is sort of the slow rippling effects of the sexual revolution, kind of, and some changes in the economy, kind of having effects on people's romantic lives, right? But settling down, marriage is for later, after you've got everything kind of together, what we're going to call a capstone model later on. Relationships, because how to put this? People still want to have relationships and, have sex and all of that. But, that idea of settling down is not something they're going to do right away. You have to change the whole cultural system around it. So relationships are much more formless, right? It takes them a lot longer to coalesce into something recognizable as like long-term relationships and marriage. And you get new kind of relationship forms like hooking up, which we're going to talk about in great detail a little bit later in the course. But hookup culture emerges as a result of a lot of these other changes. Okay, and yeah, I guess I did talk about this last time, right? Marriage, changes a lot. People start to cohabit as a buffer. Now, people will still get married, at least some percentage, but marriage rates amongst millennials drop precipitously, right? So far fewer people do get married amongst the millennials. Along with that, we do see declines in the divorce rate, but only because less people are getting married to begin with. Okay, this is, I guess, where we will pick up. So, what do the millennials think is the good life, right? So the millennials, a lot like our Gen Xers, right? And we kind of saw this with the Gen Xers, that shift towards materialism. The good life is consumption, right? Consumer culture is the culture that they expect to live in for millennials. And living a good life means having lots of stuff, taking lots of vacations, doing well, having shiny toys, and all of that fun stuff. And largely, at least, when they're young, millennials view consumption in a sort of amoral way, right? As long as you can afford what you're buying, you're fine to buy it, right? You're totally entitled to buy it. It's lifestyle. It has no morality. Now, for some percentage, right, and I think we start to see this, come up a little bit more with Gen Z. There's a notion of, we should take care of each other. We see this in the millennials, right? That there is a kind of broader social purpose, right? That we should aspire towards, helping other people, although, the notion of the common good is something that most millennials don't really have a really good concept of. And yeah, for a lot of them, they're like volunteering, donating, and actually helping people, like marriage, is something that comes later in life, right? So when you're young, you focus on you, your career, your education, and the helping other people comes later once you're more established, right? Okay, yeah, and the typical aspiration is for a middle-class lifestyle, and that's basically what they want. Okay, so I think that's my last millennial slide. So despite, when we talk about the millennials, despite the fact that they're social constructionists, right? So they think the social world is inherently changeable, and that, theoretically, any social institution should be open to a sort of malleability based on, the people that make it up and what they want. Largely, they seem to be sort of passive about their power to really change the world, right? And this will play out in all sorts of ways. Voting behavior for millennials is a bit of a disaster, right? And this is kind of following a general trend, right? Voting rates for younger generations seem to continually kind of go down, and fewer people actually turn out to vote, which again is why in the last election in Canada, the boomers had an overwhelmingly strong vote, right? Largely the survival of the Liberal Party as the governing party of Canada in the last Canadian election was down to the fact that the boomers turned out for the Liberals in big numbers, right? And millennials and Gen Z, who are technically more numerous than the boomers, didn't show up as much. And were more inclined, to vote conservative, largely out of cost of living concerns. Okay, so while they are social constructionists, they really weren't that engaged when they were young. And I would say in large part this has continued, right? With millennials, they're just not that engaged, right? Few were, especially when they were young, engaged in any kind of major cultural ethical debates or challenges facing U.S. society, right? This is U.S. data, but I think the same is true in Canada. An idea of the common good, like what is the common good and how should we reach it, is something that philosophically millennials never really dealt with. And I think they still don't know, right? They still don't know what is a common good that we should strive for, because, it's not a question that was posed to them philosophically when they were young, right? And citizen, it's all individualism, right? How can you think of a common good when you're mostly focused on the individual good? And citizenship, not a word to be found in their lexicon, largely, right? Mostly they were, when they were young, and I think this is still the case, deeply engaged in their private lives. And what they wanted was good relationships with family, friends, interesting acquaintances and associates, travel, consumption, all of those things that you kind of probably associate with millennials as a quite materialistic generation. And they were at the beginning of this shift where a lot of those relationships migrated to social media or were increasingly mediated heavily by technology, right? By internet technology specifically, right? Okay. I got rid of all my question slides last time, so I'm gonna have to go find one for half a sec. But we have the technology. Okay. Oh, that was from last time. Yeah. I did upload the January 20th. Oh, I might have put the wrong date, but I'm pretty sure I put it there. I think that was from last time. Where's the stream? Where's the stream? The stream is up, right? I got it running. Yes. Okay. I'm pretty sure I did put up. Yeah?
You did put it up. It was just labeled 22nd, not 22nd.
Oh, yeah. I'm just stupid because it was yesterday. So I labeled it yes. Okay. I will say this. So I'm really stupid. When I left, I just shut my laptop, but I left the recording. I left the recording on. So when I got home, it had been recording for like 5 hours. So it was like a 10 gigabyte file. And it took me a really long time to just load it into my editing software and then cut it down and then re-render it. So that's why it took so long, because I'm dumb. And I was just like, oh, I'm done, close the laptop. But for some reason it kept recording. By the time I got to it in the evening, my computer battery was dead because it had been recording the whole time, just like a blank screen. So I have this really long video file of one slide, right? Just no audio, just that one slide. Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm a silly Billy.
I did that last year when I took one of your classes, and it was like the one day that I missed, and I went to open the YouTube live stream, and it was like 3 hours, and I was like, what did I miss?
Yeah, so I'm sorry. I do that sometimes. Because like someone will come and ask me a question, and then I just shut my laptop because I'm stupid. We all have our flaws. Okay, what did I mean by that last point on social media? Yeah, I mean, basically, more and more, right, people start to communicate with friends and acquaintances through social media. They start to keep track of their friends and acquaintances, on Facebook at first, and then Instagram. So more of kind of social life is mediated through these sites, which will lead to that sort of comparative culture, right? Where you're always like, looking at your cousin who just went to Mexico and posted all these happy family pictures on the beach in Mexico. And because you're a university professor and your wife's an elementary school teacher, you never get to go to Mexico because you can only go at the most expensive time. So, things like that. But I'm not bitter. Okay, maybe a little. All right, let's talk Gen Z or Gen Z, or sometimes people call them the Zoomers, right? Which technically is a better name, I think. It hasn't quite caught on. Everybody still, calls them Gen Z or Gen Z. I guess we're in Canada, it should be Gen Z. But I read a lot of American scholars and listen to them, so I can't quite get around that. Okay, so Gen Z, roughly speaking, born 1995 to 2010, right? So the oldest part of this cohort, right, now should be 30, right? So all of the millennials now are above 30, and the oldest part of Gen Z is rounding into their 30s, and the youngest part, right, it's just into like 16 years old, right? So this is kind of the age range now, for Gen Z. It's about 30, I guess 31 to 16. So these are your people, right? For the most part, almost everyone in this class is going to be Gen Z, myself excluded, obviously. And my darling daughter is very tail end of this, right? In 2010. So, and she just turned 16. So, yeah, this is Gen Z. All right. In her book, iGen, Jean Twenge tried to coin a better name, which she thought was a better name for this generation. Instead of Gen Z, she wanted to call you iGen. Why? Well, because, the I in that I formulation that Apple used to use for everything is supposed to mean internet, right? So your iPhone, your iPad, your iPod, we're all, iMac, right? We're all connected to the internet, right? That was the I. And because, Gen Z largely has grown, well, it's almost exclusively has grown up in the internet era, right? The internet is that ubiquitous technology for Gen Z, right? Kind of like, Gen X was that first generation that grew up entirely with the internet. iGen or Gen Z is the first, Gen X is the first one that grew up entirely with television, right? Television. Everybody had a TV. It was ubiquitous for their whole lives, and none of that generation grew up without television, really. None of Gen Z grew up without the internet. And as they got older and moved through this, it got more and more pervasive in their lives, right? So the ubiquity of the internet, it being everywhere, is really the defining feature of Gen Z, especially post 2007, right? And 2007 is the year that Apple launches the iPhone. It gets even more ubiquitous, and like when we get to Gen Alpha, right? I have a little bit of early Gen Alpha data. I'm going to show it to you. I'm going to jump ahead because it's probably not shocking to you. It's just a little shocking to me. Smartphone ownership for 13-year-olds in Gen Alpha is 97%, which is like, honestly, maybe too much. It is as ubiquitous a social force as you will ever find anywhere in any kind of sociological system is smartphone ownership, right? And this largely is, the case for Gen Z as they, that's not what I wanted to do. As they age kind of through the system, right, the internet becomes more and more a part, and the smartphone is that key tool of access, right? And yeah, that starts with the iPhone, the introduction of the iPhone in 2007. It takes a few years to spin up, right? The original iPhone's not that popular because it's really expensive and doesn't do that much. But by the time you hit the iPhone 4, so technically I think, yeah, it's 4 years later because it goes iPhone, iPhone 3G, iPhone 3GS, and then iPhone 4. It's become a really mainstream consumer product, and the rates of adoption for smartphones really explode. iPhone 4 comes out the same year as the Galaxy S as well. So there's an Android alternative that's, maybe not just as good, but pretty close. Okay. And yeah, it moved mobile phones, like cell phones had already been proliferating, prior to this. But the iPhone, and again, especially the iPhone 4, moves mobile phones into the internet age. And yeah, it's likely the defining technology for Gen Z, right? Everybody has one and everybody wants one. Okay, so not surprisingly, right, Gen Z is the culmination of a kind of slow and steady movement that's been going on since the boomers towards more and more individualism and individuality being really important. According to Twenge, Gen Z also a really safety-obsessed generation. And I mean, we see this discourse about Gen Z coming out in lots of different forums. Her kind of frequent co-author and friend, a guy named Jonathan Haidt, and we'll hear about him later. I know I keep promising you later stuff. We'll talk about his book, The Anxious Generation, later in the course. But he largely views Gen Z as safety obsessed, and he wrote a book about it called "The Coddling of the American Mind." About Gen Z on campus and how, physical safety, yes, but also they start to worry about emotional and mental safety. And he and his co-author, Greg Lukianoff, map out this change that happens when Gen Z shows up on campus, where, there's much more censorship, much less kind of free debate, and much more worry about, the harm that ideas can do to people. Okay, so very safety obsessed, both physically and emotionally, according to these authors, right? Gen Z, fearful of its economic future, right? This seems to be largely driven by the fact that, some of their early awareness is watching the millennials go through the 2008-2009 recession and financial crisis, but they see the effects of this and they see how long it takes for the millennials to sort of kind of get it together afterwards. And now I think, we could still say this, but a lot of anxieties about AI also driving this as well. Gen Z, very tolerant, right? No patience for inequality based on gender, race, or sexual orientation. right? They dislike racism, sexism, homophobia, transphobia, all of those things to a pretty huge extent. And now this one, and this is probably the point where Twenge's analysis of Gen Z gets a little bit controversial, and there's been some objection to it, though I think it's likely correct. They seem to be growing up more slowly than previous generations, right? And what's really specific about this is they hit a lot of markers of kind of life transitions later, right? So things like, they're less likely to get driver's licenses. They get them later than Gen Xers and millennials did. Oh my God, trying to get my 16-year-old to like get her learner's license, it's like pulling teeth. I think actually pulling teeth would be easier. It's like, well, I'll get it later. And anyway, I heard her telling one of her friends when they were over, well, I'll probably go to U of A, so I don't really need a driver's license because my dad works there, so he'll just drive me. I'm like, God damn it. She has to go to McEwen now. Can't send her to a real school. She has to go to McEwen. No, I'm kidding. Sorry. Just a little shot across the river. Okay. That's not on the internet, right? I'll be fine. So yeah, no, I'm kidding. McEwen's fine. I have lots of friends at McEwen. It's a good school. Has some advantages even. Now let's talk about King's. No, I'm kidding. That's not. King's is still better than Concordia University of Edmonton. No, I'm just being mean to everyone. All right. Then I have friends who went to University of Toronto, and they're like, well, let me tell you about the Harvard of Canada. So everybody looks down on someone, right? Other things, they have sex later and less frequently than in past generations. We'll see this, in more detail when we look at some of the numbers on kind of sex and sexuality. But yeah, definitely becoming sexually active considerably later, right? And these are just like a few quick hits, right? 15% fewer 12th graders had sex in 2015 than in 1991, and almost 50% fewer 9th graders had sex than in 1991. 9th graders, right? So no one should be sad about that. That's a good number. But yeah, definitely less sexually active, especially than their Gen X peers. And in 2015, when she wrote the book, they were pretty comfortable chilling with their parents all the time. So, drive me, daddy, is apparently a generational philosophy. All right, so the other thing, and the one that Twenge's more concerned with, and again, where people have objected to her work at times, is her contention that Gen Z is at the very leading edge of a deep mental health crisis, right? And again, I can't talk about everything all at once, but this is like one of the last units in the course where we talk about youth and mental health. I got a ton of statistics on this, and I think, it's pretty hard to deny. Okay, so their mental health is, not great. That said, they're physically safer than any generation in the past, right? So they're less likely to smoke, do drugs, they drink less, alcohol, and they engage in alcohol consumption later than previous generations. They're less likely to drive hazardously or at all. And I don't say that snarkily. I'm not making a comment about my daughter. They get their licenses later. It's creeping into the 20s now when people get, as an average in Gen Z, get their driver's license. Oh God. They're less likely to get into a car driven by someone who's intoxicated, less likely to get murdered, less likely to fight. And their parents know where they are most of the time and who they're with most of the time. This is, again, largely driven by smartphones, right? Because you can text message with them, or like if I wanted to, I open the Family Link app on my phone and I can tell you where both of my older two kids that have smartphones are right now. Hopefully that's at school. I won't do it because I'm sure they're at school. That's where they're supposed to be. Everything's fine. One night our daughter was supposed to be going to the mall with her friend, and then we opened the app and she's like downtown on Jasper Ave, and we're like, it turns out they had taken a really convoluted way of getting to Southgate, which ended up going through downtown. Anyway, neither here nor there. But right, it's easy to figure that out. Now, all of these things are really interesting, and it's largely driven by the fact that, how to put this, they just are at home most of the time, right? And this is something we'll again talk about as we go through the course. The lives of young people are increasingly dominated by screens, right? They spend more and more time on screens as more screens proliferate, right? And there's so many more screens. And the level of entertainment that they can access at home has made it so that they don't have to go out as much. And I think, and this is a bad joke, but I make it every year. You know, it used to be Netflix and chill, right? Which I know is a euphemism for sex. But increasingly, because they just stay at home all the time, it's just Netflix, right? There's no chilling because the other person is also at home, and you're maybe text messaging with them while you watch something on Netflix. And again, we'll talk about this. There's some pretty objective data that suggests that there's a large proportion of young people that's just like, they don't go out, they stay home. And so, you can't get killed, you can't get murdered typically in your house, right? Like, it's possible, but you're much more likely to be murdered if you're out doing things and get into fights, like, and all of these things, right? Get into a car driven by an intoxicated person. You have to be around intoxicated people, and increasingly they're just at home, right, on a screen. They don't drive as hazardously. They are, fairly safety conscious, even when it comes to driving. And Twinkie notes that the most favored vehicle of the Gen Z, of Gen Z is the Toyota Corolla, the world's third most boring car. No, it is a boring car. I'm sorry. It's not a very interesting thing to drive, but it's very safe, right? They're very safety conscious, but a lot of their safety is driven by the fact that they are just home. Okay. Now that said, would I buy a Toyota Corolla? I would. I'm also boring, so it works out. All right. So some other things on Gen Z. When it comes to their views of gender, sexuality, and all of this, they're kind of a standout, right? They're very different than some of our other generational cohorts, right? So 2/3 of them, and this book, when does this end? 2021. So coming the 5 years before 2021, 2022, 2/3 of the young adults, right, in that Gen Z cohort had said they were becoming more supportive of transgender rights. Now, it looks like this has actually started to turn around again. And I'll bring in some statistics a little bit later again. I have to track them down. But it looks like this is now kind of taken a turn back the other way. But up to kind of mid-2022, 2023, I was trending in a very kind of tolerant, supportive of trans rights direction. Gender for Gen Z seems to be much more fluid than for any other generation. And, as a consequence, Gen Z has a much richer vocabulary for talking about gender than other generational cohorts, right? And I think just like some of the terms, there's way more than this, right? Non-binary is probably the most common one, trans, non-binary, but gender fluid, also really common, gender queer, demi-boy, demi-girl, and there's a million of them. Well, I don't know if there's actually a million of them. There's a lot of different terms, and it's proliferated amongst Gen Z. They seem much more, or they have seemed much more willing to play with gender norms than other generations, right? All right, and what do we have on our charts here? Percentage of US adults identifying as transgender, right, and non-binary, and what you see, right, it's still not a huge percent, because we're still sub 3% for trans, and just above 3% for non-binary, but clearly Gen Z, there's a lot more of them than prior generations, right? And the same percent of US adults who believe there are more than two genders, right? It's not like a crazy, and this is obviously at 3 different time periods, but again, Gen Z is above them in all 3 of these kind of like cross-sectional snapshots, right? 2019, 2020, early 2020, and 2020, early 2021, right? Definitely more of them believe there's more than 2 genders. Now again, some of this has started to reverse. Not so much this belief, but definitely things like identification as non-binary has started to kind of slow down and reverse a little bit through this cohort. Okay, more on gender. Yeah, the proportion of those who identify as transgender increased most amongst those assigned female at birth, right? Though it has also increased amongst those assigned male at birth. But you can kind of see, right, if we go back historically, and the historical trend for trans identification is that it's been more common for those assigned male at birth. Historically, right, it kind of evens out amongst the millennials. And then for Gen Z, right, assigned female at birth, becomes, are much more likely to identify as transgender, right? Yeah, we see similar things for non-binary, right? Non-binary, again, a relatively new category as a mainstream category of thought, right? But if we look at our generational cohorts, right, it's roughly even in the boomers and Gen X. In millennials, assigned female at birth pulls ahead a little bit and then pulls way ahead when we look at Gen Z, right? So we're seeing kind of generational shift in how people think about their sexuality and gender identity and all of those things. And yeah, number of young adults who identify as transgender or non-binary has had roughly, at the point where she was writing this, quadrupled overall. There are some accounts now that are saying that it is in free fall, right, and that a lot of people who were identifying as non-binary have given up that identity. But I've only seen a couple of data points, so I wouldn't be. I'll show you some of this data at another point. I wouldn't be willing to say it's a full-on trend at this point. And yeah, overall, it's kind of increased everywhere. So if you ever hear a discourse that it's like, oh, it's only happening on the liberal elite coasts, no, it's a pretty universal phenomenon amongst Gen Z, rural, urban, in red states, blue states, in the US, and more conservative and less conservative provinces in Canada. It's all pretty straightforwardly been an increase in these different and, I guess, transgender and non-binary identification in general, right? And yeah, we've seen similar increases are also seen in those identifying as gay, lesbian, and bisexual, though, obviously the big jump here is in those, female bisexual, right, took the biggest jump, right, going from, if we look at, the silence, it's like nothing, the boomers, it's pretty low. For millennials, it was about a little less than 10%, but in Gen Z, it's something like 23% of women identifying as bisexual. So definitely a change in kind of orientation there, or at least expression. I haven't seen a question slide forever. Okay. Oh, 3 Yoda Camry. Got my license at 19. You are brave. Netflix is less expensive than going to the bar every weekend. Sure is. It's also safer. And you're going to meet like 0% as many people. But cool. I'm good with it. Bar scene was crap anyway when I was young. I did not enjoy it. You're brave with your Toyota Corolla. You feel victimized as a 23-year-old without your license. I'm sorry to hurt you. I got my license like on my 16th birthday. It's such a hard thing for me to see. You're all driving Toyota Corollas. All of you. Statistics don't lie. Do you have any statistics or interesting info about how COVID impacted the use of social media within Gen Z and Gen Alpha? I mean, yes, but also it's not that interesting. I mean, it increased for a while, right? And obviously through those COVID years, everybody was on social media a lot. And then it kind of decreases as everybody re-enters the world. It's not that interesting in terms of use. I think what's more interesting is the potential effects. But again, I don't want to spoil stuff. I just want to promise things that we'll get to later. That's my thing, if you haven't figured it out. Okay, cool. Wait, did I skip a slide? I did skip a slide. Okay. Time flies. Gen Z and delayed adulthood. Okay. Yeah, marriage, long-term relationships, and children, all things. Sorry, that should be Gen Z. I edit that. Gen Z think are for later, like much later, right? And what do we see? Rates of these things, right? Do they prefer to have a mate, right? Someone to be with? They still like overwhelmingly do. But as we get to kind of the middle part of this Gen Z sample, right? And there's a few cohorts that still have to come through here. So this, I would say, is not definitive, but it looks like, it's on its way kind of down, right? From over 85 down to getting close to 80. The percentage that think they're likely to get married, and again, we'll talk about this more when we talk about marriage in the family unit, but it's on its way down. It's kind of back to where it was in 1976, right? It went back up amongst the millennials a little bit, and now it seems to be receding again. Fewer people think they're likely to get married. And this last one, right? The percent saying that marriage and family are extremely important, also on the decline, right? And declines really sharply from about 2013, 2015, right? It's still a majority position. You're still talking more than 2/3, but definitely, it seems to be that's not where people are finding their identity. These folks have the lowest birth rate for teens and early 20s ever recorded. And again, that's probably a good thing. It's not good for total fertility rates, definitely, but teen pregnancies are generally not that great. So, good, but we definitely see, age at birth the first child creeping later and later, and it looks like for Gen Z, getting into the late 20s, with, probably going to cross into the early 30s at some point. Okay. Okay, one of my thoughts on the term Xennial for those born in 1995 to 2000. So unfortunately, Xennial is also confusing because people also use Xennial for people on the border of Gen X and Gen Z. Yes?
Do you have any like that? Do you know if Gen Z by any chance is more polarized than previous generations? Because I don't know if it's just like my personal experience of like people I've met, but I feel like with every other generation, there's kind of like a general consensus on like
politics, you're thinking?
Like marriage, everything like that. But with Gen Z's, like I've met so many people that are like so hardcore one way, like, and it's like usually mostly like pretty liberal. But then the people that I've met that are like hardcore conservative are always like they're never like millennials, like they're always like Gen Z as well. Or like same with marriage, like so many people I know like don't want to like ever get married or like never want to have kids or anything. But then also the people I've met that are married at like 20, like 18, 19, 20, like they're Gen Z. So I'm like wondering if there's any like statistics that would show if they're more polarized as a generation in general or like more.
So, overall political polarization is growing across the board. One thing I will say, and again, I have charts on this, but not at my fingertips. Political ideology seems to be splitting amongst Gen Z, but probably in maybe not a slightly counterintuitive way. You might actually resonate with this. It seems to be splitting along male-female lines, right? Where young men, in a lot of cases, are getting much more conservative, and young women are getting much more liberal. And the divergence in terms of their political ideologies, we're seeing this in really weird ways. Like, I don't have it in this course because, I don't spend that much time talking about religion in this course. But in SOC of religion, right, we're seeing this weird trend towards young men becoming much more religious, right? In what looks like appreciable numbers, though we don't have a ton of data on it, and young women getting way less religious. And so there seems to be a male-female split in Gen Z.
I noticed, like, I don't know, again, it's probably maybe it's just like, I know crazy people. I don't
know. You know crazy people. Sure.
Very, like, extreme people, but it's like, because I've noticed it on both, like, because also, like, I've actually noticed more, like, at least just, again, for people, I know more women that kind of fall just, like a little bit more left, but, like, still more, like, regular, like, center, but then, like,
sure.
Even, like, the super, like, polarized people, like, to the right or left, a lot of them are men, so including like super like liberal men.
Okay.
And like, but I don't know.
I mean, and there's always going to be a
Yeah.
spread, right? Like it's, it's a bell curve in a sense where you're going to have, really kind of conservative at one end of the curve and really liberal at the other. And there's going to be men at both ends of that. It just seems like the curve has moved a little bit more towards that conservative end for men, and for women, the curve is kind of shifting a little bit over. But yeah, there's never a universal statement that's like all women are super liberal, right? That you couldn't make a statement like that because there's always going to be, and I suppose if someone's getting married at 20 or 19 years old, there are going to be some women who are in that category, but it's not a ton. Right, and so your sample size is probably just not big enough.
I was just wondering because I've like noticed it, and I was like, I don't know if it's just like an internet phenomenon, but I'm like, no, now I'm like seeing it in my daily life.
So it is an internet phenomenon that is now bleeding into your daily life, right? Because the internet seems to have polarized men and women in different directions. I will say the names Andrew Tate and Nick Fuentes more times than I care to. But these people are having a real effect, sadly, much to my chagrin. Honestly, if someone could explain Nick Fuentes to me in a way that makes me understand why people care about this person, I would be eternally grateful because I watch clips of him and I feel deeply annoyed. And like he's slouchy and weird, and then he said steak sucks, and I'm like, okay, you're dead to me. Like, you like chicken nuggets more than steak? Go die, please. Probably have heart disease. Anyway, I'm not a big Nick Fuentes fan, if you can't tell. But sorry, did I answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, we'll talk about that later too, because there's a really big split going on, and it's really weird. And we're sort of seeing it in real time, and we're a little bit at a loss to explain what the heck is going on. But I will present some I think probable theories as to what is happening and why. There's a lot of overlapping causes. Okay, what was I saying? Oh yes, they are unhappy. Gen Z is unhappy. Oh yeah, also Zennial. What if you okay, I don't know. That's a really searching question. I don't mean to laugh, and I want to do a little bit more and maybe come back to that at the beginning of next class. Okay. Oh yes, report that they are unhappy, right? Oh yeah, and Zennial. We have two forms of Zennial, right? Zennial with an X and Zennial with a Z, which is why I don't like it, because then they are pronounced the same, and it gets really confusing. Because that's a Gen X millennial, and Zennial with a Z is a Gen Z millennial kind of crossover, and it just gets really confusing. And I'm trying to think of Zoomermial. No, that sounds bad. There's a reason I don't get to name things. Okay, what was I saying? Yes. Reports that they are unhappy, right? What we're seeing, and it looks like a pretty universal trend globally, though certainly in the Anglosphere, is increasing rates of young people reporting that they're unhappy, anxious, and depressed, right? And again, we're going to talk about this in probably excruciating detail, but it's definitely happening. It's not localized. It's happening all over the place, right? And we can look at France, we could look at Germany, Sweden, Norway, Finland. It's happening in all of these places. Okay. I've got 4 minutes left. I have to read this question. What if you have a twin? This question feels like a stupid question, but does that impact fertility rate? Like for people who have twins in their early 20s. So to impact total fertility rates, because it's an aggregate number, right? A lot of people will have to have twins. What really is happening is a lot of people are having either one child or no children. And so that is lowering it. So, I once did a calculation, just, spitballing bad numbers, naive model, on what percentage of Gen Z women would have to have 3 children or more to increase total fertility back to replacement fertility. And my model, and again, this model is not right, but it was somewhere between 45 and 55%, right? So to raise total fertility, you have to have a lot of people having extra children, right? Especially when you consider, relatively high numbers having 1 or 0 children. So anyway, that's a terrible answer to your wonderful question. I'll talk more about my terrible model later on. Okay, so 3 minutes. We can talk about this for 3 minutes. In terms of their views of the world, Gen Z seems increasingly pessimistic, right? And they have a lot of problems kind of with the world. So this is America, right? 6 out of 10 Gen Zers disagree with the statement that America is a fair society where everyone can get ahead. 3/4 of Gen Zers, agree either strongly or less so with the statement that we should tear society down and start again. This is a very bad number. This is how revolutions start, with people getting their heads chopped off or shot against walls, right? Bad numbers. Revolutions start with unhappy young people, largely. 4 out of 10 Zoomers, believe the U.S. founders are better described as villains than heroes, right? So this is a big shift in American attitudes. That's still not a majority position, but it's a significant minority. 36% said they're very or extremely proud to be American, meaning, approximately 2/3 aren't very or extremely proud to be American. And yeah, more of them are negative on capitalism. Only a slim majority have a positive view of capitalism. And they tend to perceive discrimination and an external locus of control. What that means, right, is more and more Gen Zers see their lives as not being under their control. So no matter what their efforts are, no matter how hard they work, no matter what they do, they aren't going to be able to achieve a good life because there are external forces like Elon Musk working against them, right? Or whatever, right? Capitalism, billionaires, right? There's lots of bugaboos and there's lots of forces that Gen Zers think are arrayed against them. But increasingly, this number largely, I think, comes out of this kind of perception. Okay, can I zoom in on my charts? No. Oops, now I hit the Copilot button, which I don't think I've ever done. Okay, go away, Copilot. And now I've frozen my PowerPoint. No, I just want to see if I can... one day I will figure this out. Oh, there's the magnifying glass. And it still doesn't work. Okay. Well, why don't we leave it there? We're out of time. I wanted to zoom in on these charts, and someday I will. Nope. I really will figure this out, because sometimes the magnifying glass is there and sometimes it isn't. It is there now. Okay, right? All right, we'll look at these really closely next time. We'll take a look at these charts a little bit closer. Have a great weekend. We'll see you on Monday. And I think we'll finish up this unit on Monday. We'll go through Gen Alpha, and we should be not as much data, but we'll go through it quickly.
I just have a quick question.
Of course. Let me turn off my microphone so we don't hear the voice of God at all times.
And the stream.
Yes, the stream. Turn off the stream, you fool. All right. There we go. The streaming has stopped. What can I do for you?
So I already know we get 90 minutes for the thing.
Yes.
You apply for accommodations. Like I go through the letters they give me, and for every student that has accommodations, I put in the multiplier
On the
and then
90 minutes?
on the 90 minutes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
So
Okay, thank you.
no problem.